What is up, y'all? Joey Powell for Inside Carolina on the On3 network. That's right, On3. We moved our website, same staff, same standard, new home, and that home is On3. Better technology, better innovation, just stability with familiar founders of the network. It's going to be better in the long run for us, but it's better for you, the subscriber. Right now, create your new account, get that subscription. I mean, it's $1 a month, I think, right now for new subscribers. I don't know how you can beat that, nor would you want to, but make that change. Follow with us, be with us. Check out the app. We finally have one. You guys have wanted an app for IC for a long time, and we got it. And of course, we're here as a staff to help you with any questions or thoughts or feedback you might have about everything. So I appreciate all of you joining us today. We are brought to you by Johnny T-Shirt. Picture this. It's a crisp fall afternoon in Chapel Hill, and Kenan Stadium's packed. The band's playing. The Heels are coming out of the tunnel behind a guy in a sleeveless gray hoodie. No smile, no wave, just kind of that grim look of someone who's already calculating whether or not the punter's hips are too tight for a proper drop. Bill Belichick in Carolina blue, and it sounds insane, and maybe it is insane. But what if it worked? What if the man who turned a six-round quarterback into a dynasty got a hold of a program that's been on the verge for decades? Could that do your job mantra survive in the NIL arms race of college football? Could a roster full of 4 stars buy into a game plan written in all lowercase Times New Roman? Today, with Richard Johnson from CBS Sports and Split Zone Duo, we're going to explore what a Bill Belichick era UNC football world might look like, and whether or not Kenan Stadium could handle the grumpiest turnaround in college football history. Richard, how the hell are you?
Does he actually write in lowercase Times New Roman?
Would it shock you?
No, of course not. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. That's one that hasn't come across my desk, but it certainly would not surprise me.
I don't know that, but when I'm starting to kind of imagine what a Bill Belichick intra-office memo might look like, I'm assuming it's absolutely lowercase Times New Roman.
It's either lowercase or all caps. There's no in between.
like granddad who doesn't know how to stop shouting into the that makes total sense. But man, I appreciate you making time for us today. I know you're one of the most, I guess, versed studiers of college football and understanding X's and O's, and you guys do such a phenomenal job with Split Zone Duo. But I thought it'd be a fun conversation to kind of surmise, how does this work? How might this work? What might it look like? So if you're up for it, man, let's just dive in. I think the first place I want to go is, you've been studying these archetypes for years, right? Where does this Bill Belichick control everything model even fit in today's college football ecosystem?
Yeah, the funny thing is, I think Bill Belichick's the control everything model, right? That ethos fits in the college football era that we're pretty much leaving right now, or at least transitioning into something new. Bill Belichick was the last of a dying breed in that he was the general manager and the head coach of a professional football team. There are a couple other folks who have done that, namely Bill O'Brien, his former offensive coordinator, was doing it in Houston. But that is just not something that is done really in today's day and age in the NFL. Frankly, he got that. I don't want to say he got the idea, but that it kind of goes in the vein of Parcells guys, Bill Parcells guys. Bill Parcells has a famous quote that's like, if you want me to shop for dinner, you got to let me pay for the groceries as well. That's kind of how he talked about roster building back when he coached, the Giants and the Patriots and the Jets. So, and Bill was with him at those different stops. So I think that Bill had that kind of id. That was his thing. And obviously he had help, he had assistants, he had contract guys and all that sort of stuff, but it was him. I mean, there's actually a really funny podcast I saw, Matt Light, who's a former offensive lineman for the Patriots, like talking about contract negotiation with Bill and all this sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, it was the general manager, Bill Belichick, that got the head coach, Bill Belichick, fired, whatever you want to say about how it ended at New England. Remember, those rosters post Tom Brady were not any good in New England. It's the reason he's not in that job right now. It's also the reason Gerard Mayo isn't currently in that job in New England, because the guy he handed that roster to, he handed a roster with like two guys who could play on it, the cornerback Christian and Drake May, who obviously your listeners are very familiar with. There's only two guys on that roster that could really play. Now it's Mike Vrabel's problem, but like the general manager, Bill Belichick, got in the way of the head coach, as is often the case with the general manager head coach hybrid. So he transitions now to Chapel Hill, and as I understand it, quite frankly, he's actually not doing that much general managing, as I understand. I don't know if you've heard any different, but it really is kind of the Mike Lombardi show on the personnel standpoint and the contract negotiation and all that sort of stuff. So it's just interesting how those dynamics play.
No, I think you're spot on. Some of what we've seen so far is that Lombardi is kind of the mouthpiece. He is the one that's handling the machinations of NIL and getting a roster built. But Bill has said, and what limited exposure we've had to him when he's been asked about these questions, he said very specifically that, Michael and I are of one mind in how they build this roster. So I think you're onto something there in a sense that maybe having Lombardi handle that stuff would be an asset to him so that he can focus just on the football things. We're talking with Bomani Jones on a show recently, and he made the comment, and I want to have you elaborate on this a little bit. He was talking a little bit about how Belichick, as the GM, tried to get too cute with how he filled his roster out. And I think I kind of hear you saying that a little bit about Bill trying to either get guys notoriously on the cheap, trying to really maybe live too much in this diamond in the rough era and finding guys and coaching them up. Do you feel like that's kind of is that a better understanding of what you saw from Belichick in his GM days?
Yeah, I mean, that's when they were at their best. That was how they were doing it. Now, you had, the greatest quarterback of all time. You could do a lot of stuff with your roster when you've got the greatest quarterback of all time, right? And you can go on the cheap. You can get guys in the bargain bin. He was obviously Bill's background as a scout. Bill's father, Steve, wrote literally the textbook of how to scout football. It's called Football Scouting Methods. It is, I would not say it's a very verbose read. If you actually have a copy of it, it's not exactly a page turner, but if you want to learn how to scout football players, Football Scouting Methods is the book to have. So Bill has that scouting background. And when you've got that scouting background, you're really able to find guys that fit, right? You think about the special teamers that he had, why they're so great on special teams for so long in New England is because when you're a coach who specializes in special teams, you are able to take a holistic look at your roster and figure out what is it these players can do for me, right? You could take a corner and turn him into a gunner. You could take a linebacker and turn him into an up back. It's all the different things that you can do, finding guys who can run down the field like kamikazes on kick return. Obviously, we don't kick off the same in the NFL these days, but it's you're able to find different ways to make pieces of the rosters fit, and you're able to really evaluate players from an athletic ability standpoint. That is why I love special teams coordinators and how they view rosters. That's Bill's background, in addition to obviously the defensive prowess that we know. So his ability to find edgewise pieces on rosters and turn them into great players is obviously well known. I do think it's funny that he never really got the wide receiver position right, like from a draft perspective.
Yeah, they're all free agents,
right? They're all free. Like it was, well, we don't really have much. Obviously, he inherited a Deion Branch in the really early days of New England, and they couldn't really find anyone. And then they find some guy named Randy Moss, and well, yeah. And then they get Wes Welker, right? You talk about a gadget player, they get a Wes Welker in free agency. They pick up a Julian Edelman, for instance, as I think he was undrafted or 6th round, and Julian Edelman was a quarterback, and they converted him. They just never really were able to find a 1st or 2nd round, a highly touted wide receiver in New England, which is just funny. But I also think you're starting to see that he's doing that with this, or him and Lombardi are doing that with this Carolina roster, right? You go and get a guy like they flipped a kid from Navy on signing day, for instance, right? They are starting to do that right now. Whether it will work, obviously, it remains to be seen. But as we know, the talent gap in college football is just so different than the talent gap in the NFL. Everybody on an NFL roster belongs on an NFL roster.
Yeah.
Not every team that Clemson faces belongs on the field facing Clemson.
Yeah.
And North Carolina is going to face Clemson. You know, it's always funny when you've got a guy who's going to play on Sundays lined up against a pre-med student at some of these schools, as that happens sometimes. So it's just a little bit of a different deal as far as, can the floor of Carolina's roster, if he's going to go with a bargain bin approach over the long term, compete with the ceiling of the sport?
Yeah. I think if you look at how he built New England, he did so in a lot of kind of situational mastery and real attention to detail. How much of that can realistically be taught to 18 to 22-year-olds in a culture that is now made up of transient rosters? Does that make sense?
Yeah, this to me is the most kind of salient question about how this is going to go with Bill. So I think Bill's superpower with the Patriots was from week to week morphing the team into what it needed to be to win on that next upcoming Sunday. I think the absolute magnum opus, they played a Monday night game with Mac Jones. I think it was like 2021 or 2022. It was a Monday night game. It was at Buffalo.
Yeah.
And it was windy, crazy, howling wind. The goalpost was like falling over. It's crazy. They threw the ball 3 times. 3 times in a professional football game and won.
That's the most beautifully stubborn thing I've ever seen.
It's unbelievable to me. It's unbelievable to me. The guy just said, all right, this is what we have to do on this given Sunday. I heard one of them Cordy twins one time talk about how they were on the sideline mid-game and they needed to get a stop, right? Had to get a stop, had to get the opposing offense off the field. And somebody buzzed down and was like, hey, we ran this play 10 years ago against the Dolphins on a 3rd down. Like, let's run it here, right? Like the famous Super Bowl play where Malcolm Butler picks it up. They installed that game week. They installed that Super Bowl week.
Yeah.
And they won the Super Bowl on it. You know what I mean? Like it's things like that you can do with professionals that I don't know if you can be bespoke week to week in college, with college kids who have so much other things on their mind, who have so much other responsibilities, who you don't have from sun up to sundown in the building like you do in the pros. That to me is the biggest question. It's can he be the full Bill with college kids?
Full Bill. Like that's the type of thing I'm gonna have to latch on to, because I think there's something there's something to that. So maybe in that vein, could you see a scenario where, you know, he's got 105 or 115 or whatever it is on the roster? I'm not sure how many they're going to keep, but you've got that many on your roster. I want to ask you, do you think it could be something as simple as you teach this many guys in your linebacking room these responsibilities? You teach this section of guys, and then maybe he learns how to deploy them that way. Is that too curated, or do you think that's the type of thing that maybe it does, for lack of a better term, dumb things down or make it easier for guys that just don't have the breadth of experience that NFL players had?
Well, I don't know if we know what this thing's going to look like at all. Did they have a spring game? I don't remember.
They had a showcase, but there was very little shown. There was very little game action. And then, you know, there's been little to no media availability so far, so we can't even diagnose like it's the most Belichick thing you would expect it to be.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. So in that way, we are getting the full Belichick. Yeah, I just you know, and they don't even have a tune-up game to do it in. Not that he would show anything against, you know, North Carolina Central or something.
Right.
But, you know, they don't even have a tune-up game, right? It's Monday night TCU where the lights will be extremely bright. So I don't even know what this thing is going to look like, to be completely honest with you. You know, he had an archetype for linebackers and guys up front that was, hey, we're going to have big hulking players. We're going to control the point of attack. We're going to fly around, and we're going to be able to play aggressive coverage behind it. You know, we're going to be able to take your best player and take him away as far as defense to offense is concerned. What exactly his offensive philosophy is, to me, is extremely muddled because of what it's been the last 3 or 4 years post Tom. You know, they had the thing where they had like 2 offensive coordinators like Matt Patricia and Joe Judge in his last year in New England. You couldn't even really put a peg on what his offensive on what his offensive philosophy was, and obviously, Mac Jones was not giving them what they needed. They had the one Cam Newton year or half a year or whatever. It's just, I don't even know what it's going to look like on offense because I can't even tell you with a straight face what it looked like on offense at the end in New England.
Yeah.
So I just think there's so many questions about what this thing is going to look like on the field.
With the no stars only roles philosophy, do you think that survives in a sport that is kind of now riddled with NIL deals and guys that are concerned with their brand? Definitely less so than in the NFL, but also they're not getting like you said earlier, it's not a full-time job yet. Do you think that kind of philosophy, do you think it sticks? Do you think he has to modify it some early on?
Well, the thing he's really going to have to modify is the lack of the every 6 month free agency kind of thing. And they may be able to curtail that and get into one portal window in December or January, which I do think is coming. When, I don't know, but I do think that's coming.
But that would help things. You're right.
That would help things. But for now, because remember, like, it's, as you know, like, it's not real free agency, right? There's no because there's no maxes.
Right.
Like, at the end of the day, and I've heard guys say this, at the end of the day, a lot of GMs and personnel staffers acknowledge, like, we can't give every player his max earning potential, because if another team wants him, there will always be more money that another team would be willing to pay, because they aren't thinking about their roster in the same way I'm thinking about my roster. So I think and that to an extent happens in NFL free agency, but it doesn't happen at the frequency and it doesn't happen at the scale that it's going to happen in January when we come back around to it, right? And then it'll happen in next April when we come back around to it. So I do think they're gonna have to figure it out from that way. They're gonna have to figure out how to navigate, as everybody's trying to figure out how to navigate this the wild free agency kind of era that we're in right now.
One of the things that we've marveled at is how Belichickian the access or lack thereof has been so far. Thinking about who he is and kind of his general disdain for the media and access, it seems like that part has softened a little bit. Access is still denied, but he seems to be a little more jovial when he's working with the media thus far. Do you feel like that's sustainable, or is he going to fall back into this, like, we're on to Cincinnati? Like, is that coming soon?
Yeah, like, I think to an extent he knows. Like, it's the on to Cincinnati thing is kind of an act to me. Always has been.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like, he's, you know what I mean? Like Saban was not. I'm not talking about it to quit ask. Or, he was like that, but then when he wanted to be, he wasn't. And I think Bill is kind of the same way. People talk about Bill behind the scenes as I don't know if perfectly normal is the way to say it, but a fine person to talk to an extent. Not exactly on to Cincinnati. But I do think the apparatus around Bill is the other interesting part of this. Obviously, UNC had a change at sports information director from who was assisting Mac and helping Mac out, and there was a void there for a few months. They've since made the hires and shorn some things up, but there was a void there, and I think in the void came some of the chaos that we saw this spring. And I think the phalanx around Bill is different. It's just there are different. The group that was in New England was together for so long. I mean, his big, media ops guy, Bergengarian, is at BC with Bill O'Brien, for instance. So it's just, there are just different voices around him. There are different folks around him to handle things. And so how that's going to work, yes, after they go on a 3-game losing streak, is going to be very, very curious.
And I think that's one of the things that we who cover the team, not that we want to see the team lose, but we're fascinated to see, like, when the adversity comes, how does that play out, right? Because even with somebody like Mac Brown, who is just as, slap you on the back, as congenial as he could be, was not really well received when things went south in a hurry. And so with somebody like Belichick, you wonder what's the what's the morphing of that going to look like? So he's been on campus for 8 months, right? With no other information, in your opinion, and we're speaking with Richard Johnson of CBS Sports Split Zone Duo. Richard, who benefits more, the offense, the defense, or the culture in just this first 8 months?
Hmm. That's a great question. Um, I would say the defense, just because I mean you are just gonna get an absolute master's theory course in defensive football from the guy. I mean, the guy's forgotten more about football than any of us will ever know, probably combined. So it's incredible to think about being a defender sitting in that room and hearing from him and learning from him. I think that's got to be incredible. I think it is interesting when you talk about the culture because it's just going to change a little bit, right? To the do your job sort of thing. Carolina, I don't have to tell you, Carolina's not a place where football runs the show.
Right.
I think it would be even more interesting if he was at a full on football school.
Right.
I don't know. I think it's just a very different dynamic doing all this, not just at any college program, but doing this at a program like Carolina.
Some detractors, both outside of and in the fan base, have said for a long time that North Carolina is a basketball school with a football problem. Um, I would ask you, what do you feel like is the biggest obstacle for Belichick's style as a leader in an environment like that?
My thing is, I think if you're coming to Carolina to play football, like you're not. It's Bill Belichick. Like the reputation precedes itself. I've talked to a parent of one of the players that came in the portal class, and they were kind of telling me like, no, like we wanted
Mhm.
we wanted that kind of culture. We wanted it. Like I don't think there's no pulling the wool over anybody's eyes about this guy. I mean, you
Not at
can
this
look it up
point.
on, you know what I mean? Like you can pull it up on YouTube, what this guy is, how this guy
Yeah.
operates. So I just don't know that there's any, not really going to be any surprises about how he kind of conducts himself day to day, which I think is interesting. A basketball school with a football program. That's a good one. I think it's fascinating how the dynamic is with him and the players
Mhm.
because I've sort of seen some things where it's not that bad and all this sort of stuff, but you know as a player, especially a player who comes in from the portal, you're
Mhm.
here to do a job, right? Like you probably did not step on campus
Right.
before committing or
Right.
signing. You're here to be a job or to do a job, and you're going to get in and get out, and maybe you'll get a degree, but you're trying to get to the league. Like everybody knows what the score is.
I will say a lot of what we've heard from parents, parents of commitments, players once they've had their availability, all of that pathway to the league. And Belichick made the joke about being the 33rd, NFL program, and Lombardi said it too. That's absolutely been a strong through line with all of his conversations in bringing players in, but also in adapting the program towards the players that remain from the previous regime. So, yeah, I think you're really onto something there. We're talking to Richard Johnson of CBS Sports and Split Zone Duo podcast. Appreciate him joining us. If you're thinking about heading to Keenan Stadium anytime this fall. First off, I hope you've got your tickets already because they are no mas. You're gonna have to hit up some secondary markets to find those. But you definitely want to go buy Johnny T-shirt while you're there on East Franklin Street in Chapel Hill. Johnny T-shirt's been a long time sponsor of Inside Carolina. They are obviously still sponsoring us as we've made our switch over to the On3 network. If you are a premium subscriber to Inside Carolina, you know that you get that extra 10% off the top of your amazing priced order from Johnny T-shirt. Visit them at johnnytshirt.com. Or as I said, if you're in Chapel Hill, go see them on Franklin Street, on East Franklin Street, and they'll take care of you. Make sure you're fitted up nice and tight. Richard, a couple more questions for you before we let you get out of here. In the NFL, Belichick had years to build his programs, right? College coaches kind of have to show progress in 2 to 3 years, 2 to 3 seasons, or they're dealing with a hot seat issue. That might even be truncated a little bit in Chapel Hill when you consider the fact that they're paying him 10 million a year. Does that kill the model before it starts? Or do you think he can do enough with a soft schedule this year to maybe ease into it a little more so than maybe somebody like a Charlie Strong or somebody that was just another college coach coming in to take the job.
Yeah, the schedule is so like the schedule is so
Super
easy.
soft.
I mean, it's like and they're going to be able to spring it on TCU week 1 too. You know what I mean? Like it's so I do think the schedule kind of it could mask how good they really are and kind of give them a little time just because again, it's weak. My thing with Bill is like you got to level this thing up. I mean, they can find anybody to go 8-4 at Carolina. Like they've done that. At least they've done this. Isn't a Kentucky thing where no one had, no one had been to a bowl game until Mark Stoops got there. Like at least they have had some success. The problem is kind of getting over that hump. The other thing I think is flying under the radar here is I don't really think it's any great secret anymore. Carolina is batting its eyes at the SEC or the Big Ten or whatever amalgamation of Super League we're going to get here at the end of the decade when these TV contracts come up. You've got to prove a seriousness in football if you're Carolina to get invited to the party.
Yeah.
Like, I think a perfect comp here is Indiana, for instance. Indiana, 2 years ago when Kurt Signetti got hired, got their key boosters in the room and said, fellas, this basketball stuff is cute, but they're not going to let us hang out in the good basketball conference, if we don't get it shored up in football. And I think, whatever future this takes, there's got to be a competency in football. There's got to be a seriousness in football that can, and I do think part of this shows that. Now, how good you'll be on the field, we'll see.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I've heard from folks that have been proponents of this hire is that it shows commitment, right? It's not just the coach; it's the bringing in a chef and giving him money to bring in a GM and to bring in different facets of a staff that haven't existed in Chapel Hill before. So you've got that, and then you're also starting to compete nationally in the NIL space. Definitely more since the House settlement, but been much more competitive with their war chest there. How Belichick uses it, again, like you said earlier, remains to be seen. Thinking about Belichick's kind of philosophy and, again, the long range program building situation, of the parts of his philosophy, whether you're talking film study, player adaptation, scheme fluidity, what of that, if any of it, is an immediate upgrade for North Carolina this season without having to have that total cultural reset?
I think the player adaptation, or the scheme adaptation, I should say, scheme adaptation is like easy. I mean, that's the one. Again, as we just talked about, we don't know how much he's gonna be able to do it, but just the variability that he has, I would imagine, just as an idea, is there. I think the development is like the hands-on, like as a defender, how you strike an opponent,
Right?
How you know what I mean? Like there would be stories about how Bill would go to pro days as when he was, the GM at New England and the head coach at New England. He would go to pro days and he would like kind of like get in the nitty gritty with the drills, right? And he would be coaching some of the guys like, no, this is how you get off. This is how you use leverage. This is how you use your body. Like those things I think are easy upgrades, day one upgrades for Carolina.
I think it was Jamie Collins, who is on the staff now, made a comment in an article by David Hale this past week for ESPN.com, just talking about how Belichick came and did essentially a one-off pro day with Collins. And if I'm messing these names up, forgive me, but I'm trying to absorb so much content, get a read on this staff. But Collins's point was that, Belichick literally got in there and worked him to death, but was showing him all this new stuff that he'd never thought of before.
Yeah.
Just in an hour and a half window with the guy that he didn't know otherwise. I think that's going to be fascinating too. And again, that echoes what we've heard about players wanting to learn from the best, wanting to sit under the Bodhi tree of the smartest mind maybe in football history. A couple of hypotheticals or fun ones before we let you get out of here. We're talking to Richard Johnson of CBS Sports here on Inside Carolina. How many games do you think before we see sleeveless hoodie on the sidelines, Bill Belichick? Is it going to happen against TCU, or do you think it's going to be wait and pulled out later in the fall?
No, I am interested in what he wears, right? Because I've seen him in a suit, and it's kind of
Yeah.
disarming. You've seen him in a suit every now and
Who,
then.
who is this guy? Where's Belichick?
I don't know. When does Bubba, when is Bubba actually done? Because I know Bubba had the sleeveless suit. I don't know if Bubba Cunningham's gonna walk out in the sleeveless suit in his suite at any point in time. But yeah, I hope the sleeves come back. And yes, I imagine, I don't know if the team stores or what have you are selling those sleeveless hoodies, but I know they got them.
I mentioned earlier, Johnny T-shirt has them. They had a Chapel Bill really, really early in the game. They had them for sale on the website. So I would imagine even if the coach isn't trotting out there in that sort of attire, that there will be a lot of folks in the stadium doing so. Um, what's the over under on him cutting the live mascot Ramses because the mascot wasn't doing his job?
everybody is going to have to do their job at Carolina. It's going to be fascinating. I mean, it's if you talk about bringing the chef in, if the food ain't right, got to do your job. You know what I mean? I think that a lot of people overestimate effort that is needed from sort of the collective. It's that is the real thing with Bill Belichick. It's about narrowing the gaze, right? It's about doing your job. It's about doing the things that are tasked to you. And in any organization, but especially a football team, like that's how it happens. You don't have to be more than what you are and who you are and what you're asked to do. That's the point of all that do your job thing. If you try to do somebody else's job, then you're not as good at your own job. We don't need two of you. We need one of you to do your job and the person next to you to do their job. And we come together. That's the essence of team. And that's what all that stuff, those mantras really mean.
All right, Richard, going to give you an open mic before you get out of here. What's the most fascinating thing you think about this entire marriage, or what's the single thing that you want to see in game one about this Belichick college football North Carolina amalgamation? I want to let you just kind of run with this a little bit and take as much line as you need to.
I just like more than anything, like it's just still crazy to me that he's doing this. Like it's still kind of crazy to me that Deion Sanders is doing it. You know what I mean? It's really wild when you sit and you think, well, the greatest coach of all time is A, not coaching for the New England Patriots,
right.
B, not coaching in the NFL, and C, coaching at North Carolina. Like there's just so, I don't know. I think I'm going to be there week one at TCU or against TCU, and just seeing him on the sideline is going to be like, I remember at ACC meetings, like literally just seeing him at ACC meetings. It's just such a jarring thing. It's wild to me. How the team looks, we just have no idea what this team is going to look like. I'm so fascinated in quite literally what this team is going to look like on the field that I can't wait. Can't wait to see it. Can't wait to finally have them play some ball. It's just going to be the most interesting subplot to the season this year.
I mean, you're not alone in that, man. That's one of the things I think all of us as a staff at IC are just champing at the bit to see this, manifest itself and actually kick off a game with him on the sideline, because we don't have a ton of access. We don't know. There's so much what if, but more importantly, there's so much hype, right? There's so much intrigue. You just shared a perspective that a lot of folks on a national level feel very similar to. And so it's going to be crazy to see how all of that converges Monday night after the first weekend of football season here in Chapel Hill. I will say you got a standing invite if you want to come join us on our pregame show on Inside Carolina Live in the Bulls lot. We'll be there. We'll certainly we'll prepare a beverage or a snack of your choice for you if you'd like to come down and hang. But we usually have a really, really robust tailgating scene down there, and hope you'll make some time for us if you can fit it into your schedule. But Richard, appreciate it, man. This has been fun. I enjoyed the insight. I enjoy it. Like I said, I love what you guys do at Split Zone Duo. If you haven't, make sure you follow Richard at RJ_CFB, or you can follow Split Zone Duo at Split Zone Duo, all one word, on X, formerly known as Twitter, or whatever it's being called this week. But Richard, thanks, man. I want to give a special shout out to you, but to everybody for listening. Johnny T-shirt for sponsoring, and to John Siegley for producing. But until next time, this has been a 2025 football season preview discussion with Richard Johnson of CBS and Split Zone Duo. Until next time, for Inside Carolina, I am Joey Powell. Y'all take it easy.